The movie begins in the village of Pinchcliffe, in the humble abode of the brilliant inventor and bicycle repairman, Alfie Clark. He lives with his two assistants, Louie the Magpie and Luca the Hedgehog. One night, the three sit in front of the television to watch the news. It is about the exploration of the moon. The reporter mentions that the first country to land on the moon and plant a flag of its own will become the sole owner of the entire moon. Many countries express their interest, and one of them is Norway. The head of Norway's newly found space program, Vigfus, presents the country's stand and confidence in winning the race to the moon. He suggests that even though many first world countries already started their space programs for this mission, all of which unfortunately fails, Norway will not be at the end of the line. Knowing about such competition, Louis shows his determination to be the first ever magpie to land on the moon. And this time, it's going to be real. The next morning, Luca wakes up and finds that nobody is at home except him. He goes outside and hears a continuous hammering sound from the workshop. Luca goes in to check and sees Alfie working on one of his inventions. Not long after, Louis arrives holding a film camera and leading the woman in front of him into the workshop. The woman introduces herself as Ingrid, the representative for the council. The crew presents their prototype of the actual rocket to Ingrid, who then expresses her interest. Ingrid grabs the remote control for the rocket and pushes it on. The rocket speeds inside the workshop before making its way outside. Alfie tries to stop the rocket, but he cannot control it with the remote. The rocket then accelerates upwards, then into the workshop it goes before it eventually explodes. They enter the workshop and see the wreckage of the explosion. Alfie decides not to continue building the rocket, but Louis insists that the council will offer them regional funding. Ingrid then admits that the support they planned to give was purely moral. Louis does not lose his conviction and promises himself he'll get to the moon even when Alfie has decided to stop. Several days and nights pass by and Louis comes home one day and then sits to watch the latest news on the international race to the moon. According to the report, no countries have made it so far due to specific reasons like funding or technical failures. However, one successful test footage has been given to the news station. It is the footage of their previous failed test launch. Alfie was unaware that Louis sent the footage to the news station and disguised it as a successful one to gain the interest of the Norwegian government. Outside their house, Norway's space program head, Vigfus Skonken, appears on the camera. He visits Alfie's house to offer the funds provided by the government to the crew. Skonken enters and hands over a briefcase full of seed money for the rocket. He says all the crew has to do is get them to the moon and the government will pay for everything. The fuel, the equipment, the launch pad, and the materials to build the rocket, the Apollo 1. However, Skonken insists he has to be one of the astronauts and mentions that since Norway will own the moon, a government official must at least set foot on the ground first. He implies it to be part of the government's role in the moon mission. He will be accompanied by Louis the Magpie. Now that everything is set, Alfie then accepts the deal. With all the necessary materials needed to build the rocket and with the help of the government-provided crew, Alfie and Louis get to work. They spend days perfecting the rocket design and clearing the forest area to build the launch pad. With the final touch, the mighty Apollo rocket is ready to take off to the moon. Only a day before the official launch, the Norwegian families gather in front of their television waiting for live updates on the race to the moon. One of the onlookers is the cheesemonger, Alvar Kleppold, who seems to be quite uninterested in the rocket at first. The N news station provides updates on the current progress of the moon mission via a live broadcast by a reporter, Frederick Hansen, and his assistant Melvin Snurken. Alfie tours the reporters into the workshop where the rocket will be remotely controlled from the ground. It is equipped with vital apparatuses like a radio for communications, a gauge for measuring gravity, and an oxygen meter to check for oxygen levels. Everything is going smoothly so far and the crew is more than prepared for the launch the next day. Kleppold, who intently watches the broadcast, gets an idea to make more money by selling a cheese that has been to the moon. On the evening before the launch, Louis sits next to Luca as they both stare at the moon. Luca expresses his worries about the mission, but Louis assures him that he will get home safe and nothing would go wrong. Louis promises Luca to fill a jar with moon dust as his gift to assure his return to Earth. Luca happily agrees. Meanwhile, two shadowy figures appear on the launch pad in front of the rocket hatch. The next morning, the last steps of the preparation are being carried out, and the entire nation anticipates this historical event. Skonken and Louis get introduced as the astronauts to represent Norway in the moon race. They then board the rocket and prepare for takeoff. Meanwhile, Luca notices that Louis forgot to bring the jar with him, and so Luca goes down to the launch pad and enters the rocket looking for Louis. However, the initial checklist for the launch has been carried out, which includes the closing of the hatch. When they are good to go, Alfie informs Louis of the takeoff countdown, T-2 minutes. Alfie then instructs Ingrid and Luca to step aside while he prepares to maneuver the rocket. But Ingrid says the last time she saw Luca was when he was about to hitch a ride into the rocket. Alfie radios Louis to check on the life form detector and sees that Luca is in the cargo hold. Alfie aborts the mission to get Luca first. Once Luca has been returned to the control room, the countdown resumes. When the number reaches 0, Ingrid interrupts Alfie and pushes the launch button herself. The rocket's exhaust engines lit up to life as it prepares for liftoff. Luca, who is afraid of the tremors from the launch, hides in the loo. In the control room, Alfie manually maneuvers the rocket, but because the cork from the wine bottle opened by Ingrid gets stuck on the steering wheel, Louis needs to take over. Now, Louis has to manually steer the rocket on course. While up in the air, the control panel beeps, receiving an alert, and the footage of the rocket outside appears on the screen. Louis sees the loo clinging onto one of the exhaust engines. He informs Alfie, who then says that Luca was supposed to go to the loo. Louis uses a pair of robotic hands to rescue Luca, however, they cannot turn back to the ground now. The rocket successfully passes through the Earth's atmosphere and into space. They discover that the space has been a dumping yard for the Earth's space mission's trash. One debris punctures the rocket's oxygen tube and it needs to be fixed manually outside of the rocket. The hatch opens and Louis appears in his spacesuit. He proceeds to the oxygen tube, and before he can patch up the leak, one metal scrap bumps into his suit. He spins as he loses his balance and floats away from the rocket. But thanks to Skonkin, who manages to rescue him with the robotic hands. Because of the leak, the oxygen meter detects low oxygen levels and the mission might be compromised. In the cargo hold, Louis repairs his broken spacesuit when Luca mentions that the lifeform detector perceives 2 dots. Louis searches and finds out they have another companion, Emmanuel Desperados, who was sent by Klepvold to guard the cheese they sneaked in last night. Now that there are 4 crews on board needing oxygen, Alfie worries that the supply might not be enough until their return, so he calls to inform them that they cannot continue with the moon landing. However, Skonkin disagrees and insists to finish what they came for. While Louis comes back from the cargo hold with Emmanuel and Luca assisting them, Skonkin sees it as an opportunity to unplug the communications cord while they are not looking. On the ground's control center, Alfie immediately gets to work to try and fix the communication systems and control panel. He leads Ingrid outside as she appears to be the cause of the malfunctions so far. Meanwhile, the rocket manages to land safely on the moon. Vigfus gets to step on the moon first, followed by the fuming Louis, who missed his chance to be the first Norwegian to do so. The entire nation watches as history unfolds in front of them. With the Norwegian flag, Skonkin and Louis prance toward the former flag and replace it with Norway's. The Norwegian citizens watching from Earth celebrate while the rocket's oxygen levels begin to deteriorate. As Louis collects the moon dust for Luca, Skonkin mentions a robot that Louis doesn't know about. Skonkin opens a crate and reveals a robot to his surprised guests. The robot was made to suck up moon dust to collect a rare substance that cannot be found on Earth called the Vigfusium. It is a very valuable substance with countless uses and can be sold for billions. Skonkin plans to start the robot and leave it to vacuum the moondust for several years before fetching it up back to Earth. However, gathering moondust will lower the reflection capacity of the moon to the point that it will shine no more. Louis strongly disagrees with exploiting the moon's resources, so Vigfus bribes Emmanuel into getting plenty of bananas in exchange for his loyalty. Emmanuel then restrains Louis and Luca by Vigfus's commands. Vigfus dons his spacesuit and takes the robot out to start vacuuming the entire moon. Meanwhile, on Earth, Alfie continues to send a Morse code to get in contact with the crew and inform them about the issue with the oxygen level. Back to the rocket, Louis and Luca are tied up when Luca notices the beeping sound on the control panel. He mentions that it seems to be a Morse code saying that the rocket has not much air left and they need to go back. Panicked, Skonkin releases the two and hurries to fix the radio he previously unplugged. Alfie informs Louis that there is a way to conserve their oxygen until they return, but the rocket has to reach its full speed. When they are about to take off, Louis notices that Luca is gone and sees from one of the cameras that the hatch has been opened. Turns out, Luca is trying to stop the vacuum robot. Louis convinces Luca to leave before their oxygen runs out, but Luca recalls how Louis told him about the stars and how he wants to save the moon. Louis then agrees to stop the robot before they leave. The two chase the robot and try to pull out its cables, but Skonkin appears with the remote control, preventing them to shut the robot down. Vigfus leads the robot to a crater and Luca loses his grip on its control panel. Luca spins in the air before falling to the ground and getting stuck. Louis then bumps Skonkin and tries to snatch the remote control, but it falls into the crater. The robot, which is circling throughout the crater, crushes the remote. Now, Skonkin loses control over the robot, and unfortunately, it has gone insane. Louis tries to get Luca out of the ground, and when the robot was about to hit them both, it suddenly stops. The two get surprised when they see Emmanuel stops the robot with his arms and throws it across the crater. Emmanuel then jumps onto the robot and pulls its control system. Skonkin tells how he regrets his decisions and apologizes for compromising their lives, and with only a little oxygen left, they can never return to Earth. The three sit on the edge of the crater as they recount their experiences in life, having met such great friends. The entire nation watching the live broadcast and knowing the situation of the Apollo rocket begin to weep for the astronauts. Even Alfie appears to have given up. While Vigfus mentions that Vigfusium can power up an engine 5 times faster than regular fuel, Louis comes up with a plan. Using Vigfusium as fuel, they can go back to Earth faster. The crew gathers the Vigfusium and carries it onto the fuel storage. Before leaving, Vigfus removes the Norwegian flag he had planted on the moon earlier, then off to Earth they go. Louis maximizes the engine capacity of the rocket, and now they are traveling faster than anyone in history did. However, because of their speed, there will be an increase in the heat level inside the rocket when entering the atmosphere. The crew holds their breath as the rocket passes through the atmosphere. With too much heat and lack of oxygen, their visions begin to blur out and everything goes dark. On the ground, Alfie and the others await their return. The crowd cheers as the parachute lands the rocket to safety. When the hatch opens, Luca and Louis run to Alfie and give him a warm hug. Meanwhile, Emmanuel hands over the cheese to Klepfold, but as soon as it reaches his hand, the cheese melts. The entire crew then delivers a speech on the moon's future exploration on national television, bringing the reporter to tears. The movie ends as Alfie, Louis, and Luca sit around the table playing cards after gazing at the moon in their humble abode at Pinchcliffe.